Today we have Graciela Moore with us. She's originally from Puerto Rico, now living in the United States. In November of 2020, she married her husband and officially became the stepmom of 5 children. And she was baptized as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints the next day. Since then, she has taken life coach training and gotten her certification through Journey Coaching Intensive. The focus of her practice as a personal coach is on mindfulness, confidence, and hope. She has a solid testimony of her calling to inspire and encourage hope, which is our topic today. Welcome, Graciela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. How are you?
We're good.
Good.
We're so excited to have you on our podcast, Lily Pod.
Yeah, and it has been great for us to get to know you as we prepared for this. So
yes, it's been wonderful to connect. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we first met actually through Instagram, and you have a page there called Song of Myself. And I would love to know why you called your coaching practice Song of Myself.
So it first started a long time ago. I opened Instagram when it first came out, and it was available just for students, or you had to have Facebook or something like that. So I've been on it for like 10 years already. And I'm a literature major, so I'm a total geek. And I just fell in love with Walt Whitman and really other American poets.
what university was that? Or college?
I went to the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. So
Cool.
There's different campuses. Yeah. English major, literature and film. And Walt Whitman, just Leaves of Grass. That's his whole life's work. And that poem, Song of Myself, just stuck with me. I come from a musical household and we all sing. I probably sing more to my child than I talk to him for real. And so it wasn't just about the singing, but it just really touched me and just stuck with me. So years later, considering branding and launching a business as a life coach and looking back at my whole life and this journey, right, that brought me to my testimony, my baptism, even right now to have this conversation, looking at all of it, the poem was just always there in the back of my mind. So when it came to figuring out what to call my practice, Song of Myself coaching just clicked and it made sense.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for clearing up that question I've had for a while since we connected on Instagram. Why did you feel so strongly about focusing on hope?
So I wasn't focused on hope at all. Not that I knew of. It's been really interesting.
It's fairly recent development, right?
Yes. So I got baptized in November, right? And before getting baptized, I was an investigator for almost 5 years. So already had a testimony, already ministered, already built relationships, 5 years investigating in the same ward. So, I was always like the teacher's pet, just showing up everywhere, even though I wasn't baptized, all the Relief Society activities, everybody knows who I am. And so I couldn't give a talk, right? Because I wasn't a member, I wasn't baptized. And so I get baptized in November, and the missionaries who have always been, in and out of my home, they kept telling me, Graciela, if you want to give a talk, just go ahead and tell the bishop. Just tell the bishop that you want to give a talk and he will pick a Sunday and there it is. And I kept saying, no, when the Spirit is ready, I will be called to talk about something and then I will know. And for months and months and months, I just didn't bring it up. I just kept praying and waiting and knowing that it was going to happen and feeling so strongly that I wasn't just going to be given, oh, it's a free topic, just talk about whatever you want. No, I knew I was going to be called to talk about something when the Spirit was ready, when the Spirit decided. And so I never brought it up. And then that call came one Sunday. Oh, Sister Moore, we want you to give a talk next week. Oh, that's great. Sure. What do you want me to talk about? well, we want you to talk about hope in Christ. I mean, mind blown. Let me figure out how to put an entire testimony in the context of hope. And that's where it started.
Wow. I just
How
felt
to
chills all over my body.
Yeah.
Like, that must have felt amazing to you to get this thing that happened that you knew was happening
Oh my gosh.
intuition and the spirit.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I sat down. I had a week. I don't know if other people get more time, but I was only given a week. And so looked through journaling and looked through recent Come Follow Me chapters, and just, what am I going to talk about? What about life coaching? And so I did my talk, and that was amazing. And then I just couldn't let it go. Revelation after revelation. What about this? What about that? And so a 4-week workshop ended up coming out, and it's really just me listening and following, promptings of the Spirit. Yeah.
And you call it your Hope series, right?
Well, I mean, this one has to do with Instagram too. So I did my talk, and that same Sunday, I send out a story that says, today was amazing. I feel so blessed. That talk was super cool. Should I do a hope series? And then I put a poll, and I'm like, yes or no, for people to vote. And of course they voted yes. And I'm like, oh, great. So now what does this look like? I have no idea what this is going to look like. I still don't really, but so far it's a 4-week workshop to accomplish a perfect brightness of hope. So I'm super excited.
Wonderful. And we're so excited to talk about that today. So as a first-time mom, married to a previously divorced man, and with you having never been married before and getting married a little bit later in life, why do you think it's important for mid-singles in particular to develop hope?
I think it's important for anyone, right? But mid-singles in particular, because there is that eagerness and that wanting and longing to be in a relationship, to, have a witness, have a partner, have a family, just fulfill destiny and whatnot, right? Yet the clock is ticking, right? And so, I mean,
vulnerable to despair in that situation, maybe.
I'm sorry, what?
So a person in that situation where that clock is ticking, like you said, may be uniquely vulnerable to feeling disappointed or despair.
Right, that's right. And the impatience of sitting and watching lives and stories take place while you are being called to wait, and while you have to just look at the bigger picture and have faith and, patiently wait for blessings to come. Well, then hope is essential. I didn't get married until I was 35. We could talk about being mid-singles all day long, right? Because it is hard. Really, especially in a church gospel and culture where families are developing all around us, in just our circles. So
right,
hope is essential. Yeah.
Well, and even though we now know that a majority of adult members of our church are single, and for one, and of course they're of all ages, but it just means there are a lot more of us than we realize. And I think that it's still, like you said, because the gospel emphasizes the importance of families, it's just what we see more, even though really we're not alone. We're, there's many of us that have less traditional family dynamics, like blended families and getting married later in life. And so I really appreciate that you said, and we agree, everybody can develop more hope for the future in their life. But for mid-singles, it's essential. I love that word that you used, essential. Yeah, that's great. So, well, let's dive in.
Yep.
Okay, so Your online hope series, from a coaching perspective, your first week is about the neuroscience of hope. And we would love for you to tell us about the neuroscience in the human brain for creating hope.
So all that I discovered, because really this is just me doing research, right? I'm not a neuroscientist and I'm not an expert on the brain at all. And I'm not a psychologist either. So I just want to, throw that out there. I'm just curious and love the internet, right? Use it to our advantage. So it happens right here in between, the eyes, behind the skull, in the prefrontal cortex, which is the youngest part of the brain. My toddler has no prefrontal cortex, essentially. So it what's developed in it is reasoning, feelings, just thoughts and how we see the world. It's really just made sense of right there in the prefrontal cortex. So
is it just
when you look
here
at it,
or up here too?
it's right behind the skull, just right here. When in Hinduism, they put a red dot on their forehead.
Yeah.
And in some, and they call it the third eye, which I think it's just fascinating. And all I know is that my brain is there.
Yeah.
And
well, and in chakras, that's your sense of intuition is right here as well.
Right. And so that's where hope, that's what lights up when you look at a picture or you think of someone, or just you exercise hope the same way you would exercise faith. That's what lights up, right? And so really what happens with the brain is, which is what we discuss on week 3, which is the habits of it. What we do, what we say, what we continually do day by day shapes how our brain functions and how our thought patterns develop. And so, you can't really just understand the concept of hope and how to hold on to it without understanding how to help your brain just move you in the right direction towards, hope. And it's not just about hope, it's also for faith and really just a life of, positivity and fulfillment and joy, which we're all called to joy, right?
Right, exactly. We are called to joy, and hope is part of that for sure. Jeff and I actually got certified as life coaches this year too. And we did it through the Foundation for Family Life. And it's been an interesting journey to examine our thoughts more and to teach more about thoughts and how they're, that we can choose which ones to focus on. And we might not choose everything that pops into our head, but ultimately we are responsible for the ones we choose to focus on and keep. Yeah. And then our last podcast, we actually talked about how we are naturally inclined as humans, I think, to be negative because we're not really, we're meant for survival. I mean, the primitive human brain is meant for survival, but
it's always looking for what's wrong, in other words, to protect us from it.
Right. And of course, MidSingles do that a lot, especially if they've been hurt in the past by relationships. And so, we have a choice to instead focus on building joy and hope and focus on the good in our life, which, and I know we'll dive into this deeper, but I appreciate that you don't feel that you can really disconnect hope from brain patterns and what we're choosing to think and focus on and say and do every day.
Right.
So how would you explain that, Graciela, in terms of, I realize you can't give us your whole course on this episode, but give us an idea of how we can, how people can manage that frontal cortex better to create more hope.
Yes, that's a great question. And what you just said is particularly interesting for individuals who have undergone specific trauma because their fight or flight, right, that alarm from the amygdala is more on point in those people because of the triggers that then create a reaction, right? So for anyone who's experienced trauma, and please, do your due diligence and research the kind of trauma that you've had. Car accidents are an example of that trauma with a capital T. Okay, well, that applies to me and my life, right? So, it's what I'm saying is someone who has experienced capital T trauma needs to focus on those habits and on focusing on those positive, the positive psychology of it all, more than someone who may have experienced trauma with a, little t, who is probably more already drawn towards positivity, optimism, mindfulness, and all that comes with it, right? So to answer your question, how can we, just consciously encourage that prefrontal cortex, right? That's kind of what your question was, right? Yeah. Am I on the right track? Okay. Yeah. So it's really all about, okay. So I have a post about this on my Instagram, and I learned it from our CEO, Noel Cordeau. It's really just like vegetables. We're supposed to eat them every day, right? At least an apple a day. Or a smoothie or a green drink or whatever you want to call it. At least have a banana. And so with positive psychology and creating positive habits, it's really a day by day thing. And what could take me 30 days to master could take you 60 days or 90 days. And so individualism is very important. And it's really just like the gospel, because we are all just, one son or daughter of God, and we all have a plan, and we all have a testimony, and we all have a path. And so with life coaching and with hope and just training your brain is really all about what works for you and your family, and just making sure that, do no harm is super important for yourself and others. And just making sure that you are on at least the mindset to want to try to do those things every day until you're finally doing them, and until you finally reach a point where it's like, I have a solid foundation of positivity, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Right.
So if I can, I want to be fair to what you're saying, but you're talking about intentionality in setting forth a program or plan that every day I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to affirmatively attempt to build more hope in myself.
That's right.
Okay. And you said do no harm. And as we've been doing thought work, as we've been doing it with ourselves and with our clients in Lily Coaching, we are aware that sometimes when we become more aware of our own thoughts, we can get down on ourselves. We can get frustrated with what we've created in life that hasn't served us. And I think that is where we can do harm if we don't combine that awareness with grace, with compassion, with self-understanding. So I appreciate that you brought up do no harm, because this thought work can be really beneficial as long as it's done in a way that is self-loving.
Correct. Yes.
If I could ask you something else too on the same subject, as a background to it, I would like to just sort of say that when I first started dating in the mid-single world, I thought, I'm not going to go within 10 feet of somebody who has trauma issues. And I found out after dating, they've all got trauma issues, even me. And I mean, literally every mid-single has triggers, and, at least everyone I've ever met has triggers and things that, put them into that fight or flight that really are pretty innocuous things. And I mean, Cathy does too. But it's funny. I mean, the other night we had a moment when she was in a fight or flight thing, and I recognized it and she recognized it. And because we understood what was happening, it was easier for me to say to her, what are you afraid of? Put my arms around her and say, this isn't going to be a big thing. And, she recognizes, because we've been doing a lot of this thought work, that, oh yeah, I'm in fight or flight right now. I've got trauma over this issue.
Well, and I could even say, I know this doesn't make sense, but this is how I'm feeling right now.
And then she was feeling that way for about 5 or 10 minutes rather than for hours or days.
Yeah.
And I think if we don't recognize it when it comes up, then it's harder to move through it. It's easier to drill down and get stuck there.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the little T, big T trauma? Because I was like hoping to maybe clarify that.
I guess that was kind of the next question on that is, a lot of the traumas that mid-singles go through, they don't recognize as trauma because they weren't in a really bad car accident, or they didn't have a spouse that beat them up.
But it could actually be PTSD that's accumulated little things over time.
Right. So you can talk to us anyway about varying degrees of trauma and how to address that.
So all I know from really just the journey community, right? And there's therapists, there's licensed therapists in it, and then coaches from all different types of backgrounds. So I come from the sales background, right? From real estate. There's other coaches that were therapists before, teachers, whatever, right? So I just want to make sure that we understand that I'm not a therapist and that all I know about trauma is from the journey community, right? But I do know one thing from the Psychology Association, the big T, right? Which is really, this has just been determined just in conversation. So the big T would be grief. So you lost a loved one, right? Someone close to you who is no longer with us, not just lost like you broke up. Car accidents. And then I honestly cannot remember the other two, but there's 4. And then every other, however, it's been brought to life as of late that there's other kinds of trauma that people do really go through on a day-to-day basis that does qualify people's brain to activate and react in a certain way, like the trigger and then the symptoms and then what you do about it. So for sure, I mean, we cannot disregard anybody who says I've had trauma. We can't just, we shouldn't even question it. It's like borderline, a thing of respect. Oh, tell me more about it. Let's figure out what kind of trauma it is. Let's not focus so much on, where does it fall under, the big T or the small t? No, let's just focus on figuring out what it is and what can we do moving forward. That's what life coaching is. And to be honest, it's one of the things that testifies to me that what I'm doing is on the right path, is how much I see life coaching just parallel or at least comparable to the atonement of Christ. Is about what you choose to do today to change your future. Let's focus on that. Tomorrow is another day. So
that's great. Good. That's great.
I also want to just use this as an opportunity to encourage our listeners, because it would be one thing, of course, for you or I to say to somebody that they haven't had trauma or not recognize it in them. But I think a lot of our listeners probably don't even recognize it in themselves. It just seems like a normal way to react to something. And I think we need to develop more self-awareness about, okay, when am I just reacting normally and when am I in trauma? When has my trigger been hit? And so, I mean, and it can be something small, like let's suppose you had a marriage where your former spouse used retail therapy all the time when they were feeling down and spent you into the poorhouse. Well, your spouse comes home with a gift for you that's, $50 or something, and you say, why didn't we discuss this? And
like you mean a new spouse, like later. Your
later spouse, or even if you've gotten through some issues with a former spouse, or within your same spouse, but either way, they come home with a gift from you that is more money than you're comfortable spending. And even if they're not a spendthrift, even if they're not anything like that other person in that regard, you could still be traumatized because it reminds you of traumatic experiences of having your lights and water shut off because you didn't pay the bill, or, it reminds you of all of these these really difficult moments you had.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's just an example. But yeah, we
I
actually,
completely relate, but I'm sorry. What's interesting about what he just said is that I relate to it on the other end. So, right. So I'll be the one doing something and then watching my husband react. And then it's like, why is he reacting that way? And I have to take into account the fact that he was married for 19 years before, he was
Right.
married to me. So it's like, and that's where grace comes in. You mentioned it earlier, and self-compassion and just communicating and understanding.
right. And in spouse compassion, because you are aware that these are triggers that have nothing to do with you, but
That's
you are
right.
sensitive to them and respectful of them,
Mhm.
because that's what we're all dealing with here as humans. And I just wanted to mention also that as coaches, we're trained to refer people to trauma therapists if there's something more
That's right.
than life coaching can do, although life coaching can do a lot.
We can help them with the thought work, but yeah, sometimes they might need EMDR or some other trauma therapy if
Right.
it's a serious thing.
So let's move to week 2. So we talked about the neuroscience of hope, where it is in our brain. And week 2, you do a future scale exercise through the American Association of Psychology. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. So it's really just one of those, if we have any young listeners, it's like, what Enneagram type are you? Or what's your personality trait? I don't know, the DISC profile or whatnot. And so this is a test from the American Psychology Association. They call it the Hope Scale, yet in the research, they request researchers to call it Future Scale, right? And so what it does is it basically divides hope into agency. I love that word, right? Into
Mhm.
agency. So agency is the will. You know that quote that says, where there's a will, there's a way.
Away. Yeah.
If you really want to do it, you're going to find a way to do it. We all agree on that, right? So it divides hope into the agency, the will that you have to do something, and then the pathways. What's available to you? What are the resources? What's holding you back, whether mentally or physically? You answer the questions and figure out the score according to their instructions, right? So I didn't make any of this up. And then you get a value for your agency and your pathways. So, for example, when I'm doing this research and I do the test for myself, I find out that I have the best intentions. My agency number was higher, but I may not still be aware, or I may not have, the pathways, the resources, or I just need a little push so that I can look for resources, right? And so on week 2, what we do, so on week 1, everyone is encouraged to pick a goal. Pick a goal in your life that you want to focus on during the 4-week of the series, because if we are taking the series as a group, then imagine what all of us can do, hoping together for each other's goals to come up, right? And to manifest, and for us to be blessed with them. And if we're doing the series one by one, then that's 2 people hoping for that goal, and that's enough, right? So we pick the goal on week 1, and then on week 2, we're like, okay, so you pick that goal. Let's think about whether you lean more towards the agency or the pathway of it all. And then you add those 2 numbers together. And on a scale from 1 to 100, you get a hope score. And I say quote unquote because who cares? Like the scale may tell me that the scale may tell me that I'm on a 42 in the hope scale, but I want to say that I'm at an 85, right? Because I'm hopeful and I'm looking for that positivity. You see where I'm going?
And you're the one that gets to say.
That's right. And I'm the one that gets to say. And then, we look for confirmation, revelation, testimony, and we hope that we're doing it right, and that we're just really just doing the best that we can. It takes, all of us.
So you talked about resources, and one of those could be a supportive group around you. I think you kind of talked about that. What other resources are you talking about?
Well, so think about me, for example. I'll use myself, right? Because I can only speak for myself. I don't want to speak for other people. Well, what resources? Okay, so I grew up in an island.
Right.
where English was not the norm. Even though we all learned English in school, lots of people, even myself, did not have cable. If you had cable, it was like, ooh, awesome. You know, if you had a family that brought you to Disney World every single summer, that was cool. That wasn't my case, right? So what resources did I have to learn English with my desire to learn English? Well, all I had was books that I didn't understand and movies. So those were the pathways that I used growing up. Now, fast forward 30 some years later, and I'm here and I'm about to graduate and get my certification in life coaching. And I have this hope idea ruminating in my brain. Well, how can I do it? What are the pathways? Okay, well, Google is one of the pathways. I need to do research. And so, of course, we can break Google into the other pathways. I need Wi-Fi. I need time on my computer, right? And you keep breaking it up. So pathways is really just what are the options that you have? How do they materialize? What are the channels that you can use to move forward? So, you know, me reaching out to you on an email so that we could have this conversation, that's a pathway.
Right.
Right. Well, we're so glad you came on. Do you
Yeah.
have anything more you want to say about week 2? Or did you have a
No.
question?
Well, so what you're talking about with resources is sort of creatively thinking about what you want to do or where you want to go, what kind of hope you want to build, and what are the things available to me to help me move in that direction.
Yes, you sound just like a life coach. Yes, that's what we figure out. That's correct.
Okay, awesome. Is there anything else you want to say about week 2?
No, really, it just
we
leads,
covered
it
it.
just leads, yeah, it just leads into week 4 because week 4 is essentially,
Well, I think it was
oh
week
yeah,
2,
week
right?
3.
Right. So week
Sorry.
3 is
Yeah,
what you mean?
that's right. It leads into week 3. That's
Okay.
right. 2, 3 comes after. And that's when the conversation about what we do every day and how much it matters. That's when we have that conversation, right? You know, you want a testimony, well then bear your testimony. Right? You gain a testimony by bearing your testimony. Okay. And so outside of our gospel, people know about affirmations and people know that what you tell yourself matters. And so I'm very big as a coach on zero negative self-talk, right? So saying things like, oh, I hate my life, or you know, I'm not good at this, or I'm not good at that. No, let's eliminate that type of dialogue, right? So that's where the habits come into play. And it's really all about a 31-day journal of affirmations and journal promptings. So every single day you get an affirmation and you get a journal prompting. And they're all about hope. And they were all done by me, even though they all sound like what's out there, like, you know, I'm special and I'm loved and I'm protected. But, you know, some of them are very interesting, like I choose to blank and blank during the waiting. Okay, what do you choose to do? Do you choose to complain and be anxious during the waiting, right? Or do you choose to learn and grow during the waiting? Do you choose to work and serve during the waiting? And so bringing all of those things into the surface, because you read the words and then you journal about them, that's how you start recreating pathways in your brain. And so you start paving over negative pathways that you may subconsciously, or as a victim of your environment, or even consciously have done in the past. Today, you are committed to repaving those pathways with positivity. And that's what the habits of hope is, it's all about, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
tell us, we've talked about this with you before, but I'd love for you to define the waiting.
The waiting, oh my gosh. We hate waiting. We all do. It's a norm, you know. In comes the Industrial Revolution and then technology, and you know, we no longer have to wait for a text message. It comes in ding, like automatic, right? And so all of these advantages create a sense of immediacy that in some cases just doesn't apply and doesn't make sense. And to focus on how it doesn't apply and doesn't make sense, it's not good. Because what you do to yourself is just not enjoy the in between. You're not learning what happens in the day to day. And so, I feel guilty sometimes. It's like, oh, I can't wait for my toddler to be a little older so that there's less of a mess. And then the other side of that is I'm going to instantly regret it
Oh,
because
yeah.
I need to take his childhood one day at a time, and his mess is his mess. And, we just take it day by day.
So let me ask you something, Graciela, on this subject, because I see kind of two sides to this coin. One is the person who says, I really want to be married, but I hate dating. And it seems like a double-minded kind of way of thinking. Like, and I see that particular statement a lot among mid-singles that I've worked or otherwise associated with. Oh, I hate dating. I hate all the games. I hate, and it seems like the more and more we say things like that to ourselves, the further and further the what we really want seems to be away from us. It seems the barriers seem bigger. And, maybe there's a different way to think about that.
What would you say to someone who is a mid-single, who doesn't like to date, but they would like to be married? What would you encourage them to do to create pathways towards that end?
Right. So I love that you brought this up, Jeff, because it takes us back to that whole negative self-talk thing, right?
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, first of all, as a coach, I don't give advice, right? It's not allowed. We're here to just drill deep into why people say or do things. However, because I'm on social media, well, that's where we give all the advice we want. So
Right.
what I would say is, if you are mid-single, if you want to get married, and if you want to change the situation that you brought up, Jeff, right? If you're really committed to doing that, well, why don't we start with no longer saying and articulating things like, I hate dating.
Right.
Let's have a conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I could say in response to my own thoughts about that, for example, if I was that person, I can make an effort to change the process, to bring more authenticity to dating, to have fewer games and more real interaction.
That's so much more empowering. Yeah.
Yeah, it really just takes a conversation, because okay, so you're the person, and it takes two, right, to have a relationship. It takes two to go on a good date, right? Okay, well then communicate. We're adults. Communicate with the person that you're dating and say, I'm not here to waste my time.
Right.
I am here intentionally because I know what I want. I've already defined it. I've already discussed it with my life coach. And so, right. And so if you are not on the same boat, then this is not going to be a good date for either of us. So, okay, that's good. That's fine. And really getting used to all of this positive psychology and the habits of hope is really about not being broken hearted when you have to deny someone because they're not on your level of hope or on your level of testimony or whatnot. It really takes two. So if you already have that commitment in you that you want to go ahead and date intentionally, then let's let the other person know that you're dating intentionally and that they should too, or
love that.
And if they don't want to, maybe that's not your person.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Or, we have to assess each other's levels of hope and each other's levels of commitment. And so maybe they're not ready yet, but they really like you. Okay, it takes two. Let's just communicate and be adults about it and be safe and be respectful and just do it right. And it's possible.
Yeah.
It just
it took 2 years for our relationship to develop to marriage because of the issues you're talking about. We were in different places at different times and had different levels of comfort with, getting serious and whatnot. And people can read about that in our book, but.
And the theme of our marriage and how we connected as a couple is intention. So I love that you're saying that. And then our book is called Intentional Courtship, a MidSingles Guide to Peace, Progress, and Pairing Up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's the title. It's coming out in a few weeks. We're super excited to share it with everyone.
Yay.
Yeah. And so yes, intention is super important. And I think those daily habits of hope that you're talking about is certainly setting an intention, a daily one, to create more hope in your brain and in your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yep.
I love that week.
So,
mean, that makes me happy to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. If I could ask you a question about the other side of that coin that I sometimes see, it's the person, usually it's a single mom, but I've seen single dads with the same thought process. They would like to be married and happily settled with someone, but there's something fearful about that for them as well. And they think, well, I'm just at a stage of life where I'm only going to focus on my kids and I'm not going to date, and I'll worry about that later when my kids are gone. Now, of course, that may be a value judgment. And if they're truly good with that, then I don't, like you said, I'm not there to tell them what they want. But I do sense with a lot of them that it is an excuse to cover fears. Because we had one come up recently on social media as well, where there was a question about, well, I live a long way from any members of the church, and I right now I'm just going to focus on my kids and not worry about dating. And we brought up the idea that, well, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but there's a lot of options for long distance dating now. You could pray for the opportunity for yourself to move somewhere that's more conducive to creating a relationship, or to have someone move into your area that you might be able to, and of course you leave a lot to God that way, and you're being patient, like you've talked about. But I guess my question then is, if there is a desire for a relationship or some other really important thing to you, but there's a certain amount of apathy growing out of fear, how do you recommend confronting that so the person has some hope that it's really not as impossible as they think?
I mean, it's fear is fear, no matter what scenario we put it in, right? And I mean, fear is the opposite of faith, right? So it's such a touchy subject because it really depends on every single individual person and their whole life, correct? And so it's, what you're describing feels more like how I would approach it. So are you asking me as a life coach, or are you asking me, just, as a sister in our church, right? Because if it's a friend that's going through this, I would probably give a lot of advice, right? I mean, do you really want to be alone until I would probably bring all the numbers, exactly how many years between now and then? How many years between now and then when they graduate and leave and then you start dating? What about the in between? Because as a friend, if this person comes to me and says, I'm feeling very strongly about waiting, then what can I say?
Right.
Really? Right? Now, as a life
Really
coach,
what they want, then what can you say?
Right. Right. Well, as a life coach, it's like, okay, you're telling me that you want to wait, but at the same time, in other conversations, you're telling me that you really want a relationship.
Right.
Which one is it? And so as a life coach, you really figure out what the fear is really about. So for example, I recently figured out, very recently, I'm talking about maybe 3 weeks ago, realized that I'm not afraid of failure. So fear of failure is not it for me. What I'm afraid of is this or this or this or that, right? And so this person is afraid. Okay, well then let's have a conversation and talk about what really is behind that fear and what's the worst that could happen. That's one of the techniques that we learn. Let's go, well then what's the worst that could happen after that? Oh, well, I could be sad for a few months because I'm heartbroken. Okay, what's the worst that could happen after that? Blah, 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 right? And that's what the types of hope, actually, which is something that we forgot about, that I discuss on the first week of the series, the types of hope and how they lead up to the perfect brightness of hope, that mature hope that says no matter what happens, so the worst, the worst, the worst, the worst, no matter what happens, I am okay, I'm safe, I'm loved, you know, my children are okay, my job is okay, I have food in the fridge, and I have a heavenly father that loves me. And so, you know, that's really what the series is about. It's about figuring out all the roadblocks that lead us to just be okay no matter what happens.
Right. I mean, I think there is a sense there in which we want to have peace in our hearts, even if our situation is not what we might have envisioned or might have wanted. And at the same time, I think you can go so far with that as to say, well, if God drops it in my lap, I won't say no, but other than that, I'm not going to put forth any effort.
Right. And that might work for a select few people. I mean, miracles do happen. But I want to mention really quick in this podcast, because this came up this morning when I was at our ward garden. It's ginormous, and they have planted all sorts of yummy vegetables. And I was just noticing how when I went to pick tomatoes, for instance, I had to kind of dig under all the green leaves, and they were kind of hiding, right? And then potatoes and celery, you have to actually dig them up from the ground. And I think that's how most of us have to find our partner. Digging and looking and finding that diamond in the rough, you know, that perfect person for us. Not the perfect person, but perfect for us. And yet there was this eggplant, this nice shiny purple eggplant hanging there, just ready for me to just, you know, and sometimes that happens in people's lives, but we each have our own path. And so this is where I think personal revelation can be really helpful. Because I mean, who's to say that a person who's waiting doesn't know for sure that, you know, or have that faith and belief or intuition, like you did about the talk, that, you know, their partner is going to come to them, you know, in due time. But I do think more often than not, including in the garden, we have to search and work for our vegetables or our partners.
I think there is a difference between, well, if God drops it in my lap, I won't say no, and ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. That's not God dropping it in my lap. That is me seeking and God responding. And it took us several years to find each other in our middle years. And that was with
a lot of effort too, right?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting it wasn't, you know, sometimes discouraging or whatever, but I think there is a difference in that sort of enthusiastic pursuit of something we hope for, and the sort of hands in the air, well, if God drops it in my lap, okay.
Yeah. I mean, when things, it really just depends on how people think and how they name things, right? So
Right.
I personally don't like to think that God throws anything, right? He gently places it in place, and then it's up to you, right, to either take it, receive it, whatnot. And that's really what the whole negative self-talk again, because when you say things that are negative, you close off, you get blocked, and when you're not open, you don't receive, you don't, you know, you don't interact, you don't connect as well as you should, right? And
I love
so
your policy of no negative self-talk in your coaching. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with it myself. We all do.
Right.
And it's like it's one of the things that just leads to the confidence to do things and to take risks and to put yourself out there and to, you know, not be afraid to fail or not be afraid to lose things or to be broken down, because your conviction is so rooted on what you believe in and what you do. And
Right.
so
This didn't
like
work, but
the
something in the future
byproduct
will work would be like the idea is that, okay, it doesn't work until it does. And so if this didn't work, it's okay. It will work in the future. That would be a hopeful thought.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about week 4 real quick. You said that the AAP teaches that the gratitude is the optimal mindset for a hopeful person. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it was just on my research. So again, we go back to the American Association of Psychology, and what I understand, it's interesting because, and I guess this is just another witness and another testimony of how, you know, I was just led to talk about this because growing up, oh, she's so thankful. She says thank you all the time, and this is my mom describing me. So, you know, and pointing out the fact that I was just always very grateful and very thankful to people and for things, and apparently. And so when I read, so, you know, I get led to talk about hope. I'm doing my research, I'm taking my notes, I'm thinking about the language of life coaching and then the gospel and figuring out what this is going to be. I'm like, okay, what's the goal? Like, what's the peak? That's the word. Sorry. What's the peak that hope reaches in the language of psychology? And there it was, gratitude. And I'm like, oh, that makes complete sense, you know, to me, because it just fell into place. So according to the Association of Psychology, someone who reaches that level of mature hope, someone who really understands hope as a concept, can be grateful no matter what the experience is. And that's just, I mean, something that I want to aspire to. I want to be able to, come what may, you know, whatever life throws my way, right? I'll be grateful for the outcome, because if it's not a gift, it's a lesson. And I say it like that because everything is a gift, even the lesson is the gift, right? So, and again, we struggle with this daily, and that's why making it a habit is so important. You know, you're working for the hope now, so that when tragedy strikes, when trauma hits, right? Gosh forbid you have an accident later on, a huge car accident that just brings a lot of trial to your life. You're working today for when that happens. Gosh forbid, right? Hopefully it doesn't happen. But if it does, you paved the way to a perfect brightness of hope.
Oh, I love
It just, yeah. I know, it's so inspired. It's like all credit to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and I think that creates spiritual reserves too. And I know I was going to the temple a lot, and I hadn't discovered life coaching practices yet, but I had discovered other things that were helpful in mind, you know, and mindfulness and awareness. And then I had a 3-year health crisis, and I went from being able to feel the Spirit very readily to being spiritually numb because of these medical issues that really got in the way. And I think it's why Jesus healed people first and then taught them the gospel, because sometimes our bodies get in the way of being able to feel the Spirit. And I really kind of hold on to hope based on spiritual experiences I knew I could have again if I could receive healing, right? And so I think spiritual reserves is part of that perfect brightness of hope that you can maintain, or at least hold on to when those trials hit that you don't know are coming, or when or how.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's beautiful. And I'm so grateful for you that you're already past all of that, and that you're able to just focus on, you know, better and brighter things, and just creating a difference with your book and the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
That's
me
wonderful.
too. It's so great to have myself back again.
You know, Graciela, on that point that Cathy just made about it's nice to have myself back again. I had an experience. I mean, I went through depression for several years after my divorce, and not knowing the things I know today that could have helped that process be shorter.
Yeah, if we'd had our
But-
book when we were going through it, we would have done better.
But having said that, you know, I remember I had a moderately successful business that kind of went through the floor when I was focused on other things. And as I remember going through several years of real poverty, I mean, financially ruined. And I remember getting a career opportunity that I accepted, and I moved to Texas for 3 years. And it wasn't a career I really wanted. I didn't really care that much about it, but it did allow me to have consistent income for a while. And I remember just feeling so grateful that every day I could get up, I could work, I could bring in money, I could meet my needs. I mean, it was like I had a whole new lease on life. I bought a car, and it was not a new car, it was a used car, but I loved it. And it was reliable, and it got me where I wanted to go, and it was fun to drive. And I mean, the things we take for granted oftentimes, I remember just feeling like, wow, I'm alive again. I'm a person again. You know, I'm not sitting on the sidelines watching everyone else live and wishing I could do that. And I mean, that was just at that point getting to a pretty average kind of life. But there was a real sense of gratitude. And I came to believe that we can really only enjoy anything we have in our lives to the extent that we appreciate it, that we understand the blessedness of it.
That's right. Yeah. And that's so beautiful too. And thank you for sharing that. And it's like, my hope for my clients and for my kids and for really everyone is for each individual to reach a point where they can look at their past and whatever turmoils, whatever trauma, whatever drama, whatever heartbreak, and just be grateful for it because it brought you to this day. It taught you this and this and that. And so again, let's move forward. It's all about what we choose to do today so that tomorrow we can have a better day. I mean, think about it. Oh, I have a headache. I'm dehydrated. Well, did you drink water yesterday? Oh, no, you didn't drink water yesterday. So today you feel the way you do. And so it's like that with everything. It really, really is.
Everything's a little bit delayed, but yes, we do have the power to create our days. And I always say that it's our number one job every day to be in a place of feeling good, because when we are, everything that we do elevates those around us and ourselves.
I think one of the hard things about what you're saying is for a lot of people is, and I've used this analogy recently, that driving a boat is different from driving a car. You turn a car and it turns immediately. You turn a boat and you can count to 3 or something, and then finally you see it start to drift that direction. And I think life is more like driving a boat than driving a car. And so I may change my thinking about something today and make a real mental shift. How long does it take for that to show up in my life? Well, a person that, for example, has been couch surfing and laying around in their underwear all day instead of going and looking for a job, they may get up one day and start looking for a job and dress and shave and all the things they need to do to get ready to go out and look for work, get online and find opportunities and whatever. But they may not have a job the first day. It may take several months. But ultimately, that step of deciding, okay, this is what I want to do,
And then sticking
that's
with
when
it.
things really changed. It didn't really change when they got the job or got the new client or whatever. It happened in advance when that spiritual creation was made, when they made a decision, I'm going to go in this direction.
Yes, that's right. And if somebody's listening that wants to get a job and doesn't have one, then let's go out, take the Hope series, and then hopefully get a job by day like 31.
Right.
You start the Hope series, and on week 1, you say your goal is to get a job by the end of the series. Then we're going to look at all the pathways and all of the rest of it. And, hopefully you get a job at the end of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and we're big believers that you work on yourself and good things happen in your life. It might be more like steering a boat, which takes more time to turn than a car. Like you said, they're not always immediate because we're used to having things just show up, but in the waiting, we develop ourselves. And and then we continue developing, once we meet our goal or we've accomplished something really big. So I really quickly just wanted to bring up something that we mentioned in a previous discussion. It's one of our last questions. You mentioned that specific questions have broad answers. Can you tell us more about that? Because we thought it was really insightful when we talked about that with you.
Oh, specific questions have brought specific answers.
I think it's specific questions have broad answers. I think, do you remember saying that?
I don't, but I mean, okay. I feel like you're bringing something up that I was thinking about, but I didn't bring up last time. And let me tell you what it was. Listen to this. Ever since we had that conversation in preparation for this, I have been pondering my patriarchal blessing, which I didn't bring up last time. But what you are describing right now,
right?
yes, I did. I don't remember exactly when, but yes, I mean, I got baptized in November and then sometime after the new year.
Okay.
And I've pondered it many, many times. And so what you just said brings me back to it, because it's like, and really it just brings me back to life coaching and everything that we have discussed. Specific questions bring about specific answers. So earlier you mentioned self-awareness and self-regulation, and you also mentioned that we start by working on ourselves and then transcending into communicating in relationships and so on and so forth. When you are really curious and you look at things and you start calling them for what they are and questioning things, deeper and deeper and deeper, you really do get to the specifics. And I have a strong testimony of that, because everything that I have done up to this point has been me asking a specific question. Well, what do I do now? How do I feel about this? So I don't feel very positive about this. Okay, well then let me look into it. Doubt your doubts. You have to doubt everything. You question everything to get to the bottom of it and to really be ascertained of the answer and have that strong, at least intention. And then of course, pray about it, ponder it, just to receive the confirmation, right? Because we are spiritual beings having this human experience. And so again, pondering what the spirit wants and what we are meant to do and how we're meant to do it is really important. My gosh, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I love what you shared. So I'm glad I asked it, and I'm glad that you shared what you did. And I actually am getting to our last question.
Well, I do have a follow-up to that before we get to the last question, because, and I wish kind of we had gone here more, but you said a minute ago that everything you've experienced up to now is what's brought you to this point. And so we've talked a lot about how, you've studied, went to life coach school, and gave a talk where you studied certain things out. But I would like to know, excuse me, for the benefit of our audience, what are those experiences that brought you to this point, that taught you to believe in hope, in, changing your neurological pathways through thought work, whatever? What are the things that have brought you to this point and helped you to believe in what you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Cathy, I do remember what we were talking about, so I'll come back to that. But so it's really like I said earlier, I grew up in Puerto Rico, didn't move to the States until I was 27, but always wanted to move. I always knew I was going to. I don't know how. I mean, now I know, right? Now I know it was just my destiny, my path, my plan of happiness, right? Or how that applies to myself. But I didn't know back then. Back then, all I knew is that Puerto Rico doesn't feel like home because it's not. I always knew it for some reason. And so moving here was a big deal, yet it didn't happen until I was 27. I dated and met lots of people and lost hope and, thought about staying single and had all of those, scenarios run through my head, just like everyone else. And then I don't meet my husband until I'm 30. And then we don't get married until I'm 35. So it's like, what I mean by saying everything I've been through has brought me to this point is because I have experienced waiting and plans getting messed up and intentions being just broken up because there's not enough pathways or not good enough pathways, and so now that I'm able to just put two and two together and realize that it's all hope, and now I started Instagram years and years ago, but I never really felt like I had a purpose for it until now. And so now it's like, yes, life coaching, let's help people, let's change the world. I feel like I'm somehow bringing people closer to my gospel by just sharing this in a language that they can understand, right? And so I feel that every test is part of it and every trial is part of it. And, it all goes together, the mindfulness of it, the confidence of it, and the hope, they all go together.
Right.
Oh, and then Cathy, do you want me to touch back on that question? Yes. So now I remember, yes, it had to do with women who struggle with infertility, right? And how hope applies or the lack thereof, right? And so what happens with a question that is so specific to a person who is struggling with something is it's a specific question, but the answer is a general one because it really just comes down to the mindfulness again and the habits and how no matter what your struggle is, hope applies. And what you do to get to that perfect brightness of hope can also apply. So let's just focus on the day-to-day, the step-by-step, and do it together because borrowed hope is huge. It's like, I'm here just filling my cup of hope so that I can lend it out to my clients when they need it most, because I have hope in Christ and I have that advantage, but my client may not have that advantage. So it's like, here's all my hope for you. Just take it.
I love that. Oh, that's wonderful. That's such a great way to wrap up this this conversation, which I know we could go for hours. Yeah, we just love.
I know. Thank you so much. I love it. And I could talk about hope all day. It's like so awesome.
So maybe you could just, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say that I learned today that the name Graciela means a gift or favor. And so I think you were a gift and a favor to our listeners today, and as a new friend of us as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate you so much. Just really giving me an opportunity to discuss, right? That's where, like, looking at it from all angles is how you figure out what I said earlier about how you put names to things, right? So okay, I just graduated and I launched this business. What is my measure of success? How do I define whether I have failed or succeeded? Okay, well, let me tell you. I have already succeeded because I was called to talk about hope. I wasn't called to, be a millionaire. Oh, I want to be a millionaire. No, right? I was called to talk about hope. And so I'm already successful in that sense because here we are. What a blessing to be able to just spend, this amount of time or however long it takes discussing this. This is a privilege and we're so blessed by it.
Yeah, we are. Thank you so much. And maybe you could just leave us quickly with your testimony of hope, that solid testimony that you have.
Yeah, I mean, I have a solid testimony. One, that there's a plan of happiness for each of us. So hold on to that. I have a solid testimony that, you know, what is in my patriarchal blessing is true because it just is. I'm living it every single day. And, you know, just a solid testimony after I grew up Catholic, have friends in all sorts of religions and paths of thought. And after experiencing all of it, I know that this is the Church of Christ and that this is the most amazing gospel ever. And so really that's just my testimony. I sustain anybody that I need to sustain, in the sense that, you know, I love our prophet. He's the sweetest, and I love that he's a man of science. And it's just, you know, little by little, my testimony just grows stronger. And I encourage everyone to just figure out what it takes to just live a better, brighter life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
we were blessed to have Graciela Moore on our podcast today. It's going to be Lily Pod episode number 31, and it will come out next week. And we are Jeff and Cathy Teichert with Love in Later Years, and also known as Lily.
And remember that anytime is a great time for more love in your life. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.